Afternoon or good evening, depending on where you're watching. This is your friendly neighborhood Mike Krupa once again coming to you from Poland on Votum TV, our Heretics podcast, where we interview politically incorrect voices from all over the world, but especially the West, as our viewers know. And and today we have the great honor of having with us Maxime Bernier from Canada, which is a 6 hour time zone difference. But today that wasn't such a problem as with our previous guest from Seattle. So that is good. Maxime, how are you this afternoon?
Fine, thank you very much for having me. And I'm looking forward for that interview.
Excellent. Now, as some of you may know, because Maxime is a very unconventional Canadian politics, and Canadian politics is sometimes considered boring, but if you have, such as yourself, a guy who's actually being called Mad Max, I think we're going to have a very interesting interview ahead of us. So, Maxime, I want to start off with the fundamental question. You are the head of the People's Party of Canada. Now, traditionally speaking, if you look at Canadian politics, you have the old right, which is the Conservative Party, the old left, the Liberals, you have the Socialists and the NDP. And you also have, I think, a sort of contingent of the Greens right now. So in that mosaic of Canadian politics, what happened in such a stable country that you all of a sudden have a need for something called the People's Party of Canada? If you could explain to us.
Yeah, because here in Canada, the Conservative Party of Canada is only a conservative in name. And I was part of them, as you may know. I was elected the first time in Ottawa in the Parliament in 2006. I was Minister for Industry, Foreign Affairs Minister under the Harper government. And in 2017, we had a leadership contest in Canada. Harper resigned as the leader of the Conservative Party of Canada, and I decided to be part of that leadership contest. And I didn't win with 49% of the vote. And I worked with the leader at that time, Andrew Scheer, in 2017 and 2018. I tried because, not winning with 49% of the support from the membership, I said, I may have an interesting role in the party. But I had a private discussion with Andrew Scheer 15 months after the leadership contest, and that was in 2018. And I wanted to know if Andrew Scheer will take some of my bold conservative policies and ideas. And I must admit, Mike, Andrew Scheer was very honest with me. And he told me that he won't take any of my ideas. And he said, "You're right, Maxime, your ideas were popular with the membership of the Conservative Party of Canada. But he said, I'm running to be Prime Minister, and your ideas are not popular with the general population. So we won't take any of your ideas for our electoral platform for the election of 2019. And after that, I said, why staying in that party I said that the Conservative Party is intellectually and morally corrupt because they don't fight for conservative ideas. They're doing politics based on polls and focus groups. So I resigned in 2018 and we created the People's Party of Canada. And I must say that we are, the only real conservative party in Canada right now. And the Conservative, they have a new leader. His name is Pierre Poilievre, and we will have an election, I believe that in 2025. We have a minority government in Canada right now. And I must say a socialist government because that's the NDP, like you said in the beginning, the Socialist Party, that is voting with the Liberals, Trudeau. And this country is going to the left. And Poilievre, to be elected, he tried to please the big cities like Toronto and Vancouver, where there's more seats over there than in all the province of Alberta. So for our first election for us, that was in 2019, we had only 1.6% of the vote. The second election, 5% of the vote. And now, if you look at the polls, the official polls, the public one, we are around 4, 5, and 6%. So we will be ready for the next election. And we are a populist party, and we are fighting for sustainable and responsible immigration. We are saying no to the climate emergency. And so people can go on our platform, People's Party of Canada.ca, on our website, and look our platform. And I like to say, Mike, that we are doing politics differently because it's all based on ideas and policies, and we don't have a new electoral platform at every election. We are fighting in line with our conservative and common sense principles. And what I said at our first election in 2019, it will be the same one at the next election in 2025.
When I left Canada in 2013, even by today's comparison, I can say that I left a different country. Now it's been a decade. So because I'm professionally more of a scholar of American politics, but I still have a fondness for the old country, so to say. In your opinion, what have been the major changes in Canadian society and Canadian politics in the last decade, which I'm pretty sure most of them have also contributed to the rise of the PPC, that have, from a distant perspective of mine, such as, for example, have obviously changed the character of Canada in the last decade? What changes would you point out have been the most crucial ones?
I must say, like all these other political and populist parties in Europe, it's immigration. In Canada, we have mass immigration because, as you know, we are only 40 million people, and we have about 1 million newcomers every year that are coming to Canada, including 500,000 immigrants. And 10 years ago, the average for our immigration numbers were about 200,000 new immigrants every year. But now, it's 500,000. And if you add the foreign students and the temporary foreign workers, it's about 1 million every year. So, and that changed the country. Plus, also, we have a socialist government, and that government is, I believe, that it's a woke government. All the radical gender ideology, they are buying to that. The federal government, the Canadian government, is buying to that and promoting that. Trudeau did change our society the last 10 years. And I must say that's why the People's Party is growing. And I believe that at the next election, we can have maybe, I don't know, 6, 7, 8% of the vote. But it will be, I must admit, it will be very difficult to have our first candidate elected because of the parliamentary system. First, past the post, and we don't have any representation representation in parliament. So based on the number of support that you have, we had 5% of the support of the vote at the last election, but we didn't have 5% of the seats because we're not a proportional electoral system. It's our representative are elected, and the one who will have the best that will be elected. So that being said, it's very difficult to have a member of parliament, but our goal is to change the narrative, and we have more and more support. And I believe that our time will come. I'm patient, and we have a lot of support, but that support will grow.
You wrote a tweet today at 5:50, which I want to quote because sticking in that immigration theme, this is a part towards the ending of that tweet. You wrote that Canada has always been a diverse country with First Nations, French, and
Mike, I cannot hear you. I don't know if you changed something.
Hello, hello, hello. Are we hearing me? Maybe some technical problems. Hello, hello. Let me see. Chat, if you can hear us, please
you
let
hear
us
me?
know. I can hear you. I can
But I
hear
cannot
you.
hear you. I don't know what's happening. I'm looking. Okay.
Okay.
So what I do, Mike, because I don't understand,
Maybe if we
I'll go back. I'll just end that and come back in a couple of seconds. Okay.
Sure, refresh. Yep, that's what happens, ladies and gentlemen, sometimes with the technical issues, but I hope to get Maxime back with us in a moment. So, as we will remain in the immigration theme that Maxime mentioned, I think it's important to notice the numbers that he mentioned, which are pretty staggering. The numbers of immigrants obviously coming into Canada, which are growing exponentially under Trudeau. So, we're going to get into that. Hopefully Max will join us, and I think he's back. Hello, Max. Can you hear me?
Yeah, that's perfect. I don't know what happened, but I can hear you now. Sorry about that.
Okay. I think it was Klaus Schwab trying to drop in on us right now. Okay. Let's go back to the tweet that you posted today, which is in line with the immigration topic that we just discussed. I want to quote it towards the end of that tweet that you wrote. You said that Canada has always been a diverse country with First Nations, French, and British settlers as its founding nations, but continued mass immigration and policies that constantly promote more diversity will only result in ethnic balkanization, cultural disintegration, and social strife. If we want to keep our country's distinctive identity, we must emphasize what unites us, not what divides us. So, Max, that is a very powerful statement. So, if what you're saying is true in terms of how this immigration policy in Canada is being executed, and I believe it is, who would have an interest in ethnic balkanization, cultural disintegration, and social strife in Canada? Who would benefit from this?
But I believe that the liberals, they are the one, because if you look at the data, 51% of our immigrants are going to two cities, Toronto and Vancouver, and the liberals have a lot of support over there, and these newcomers usually are supporting the liberals, and I believe that it is in their political advantage to have more and more people in our country. Historically, they are voting liberals. So I believe that Trudeau thinks that he can change the society and being able to have a majority at the next election and stay in government. But now more people are looking. When I spoke about mass immigration in 2019, I didn't have a great coverage in the legacy media. They were saying that, oh, Bernier, I don't understand why you're saying that. You look like a racist, but now there's more than, I believe, about around 50% of the population in Canada who are saying that it's too much. 500,000 immigrants every year in Canada, starting officially in 2025. That will be too much, and because of that, we have a couple of crises in our country right now. We have a housing a crisis. The price of houses is going up, and same thing also for renting, because like I said before, we had 1 million newcomers last year, and all these people need a roof, and they need a roof, and that's putting pressure on our housing market, but also healthcare. We need to take care of them. So what we are saying, we want fewer immigrants, but we want to be able to take care of them. And the majority of them must be economic immigrants. Right now, if you look at the data and the statistics, only 25% of them are economic immigrants. What is an economic immigrant? Is a person that will come here and they will be able to have a job because a Canadian entrepreneur was not able to find a Canadian for that job. So they have the right to ask and look in other countries. And so that's great, because that person will come here, that person will have a job. It will be easier for that person to integrate our society. And we have only 25% of them, of our immigrants, that are economic or skilled immigrants. We need to do the opposite. 75% of them must be skilled immigrants. Now, the majority is coming under the reunification of family. But for us, a family, it's, the mother, the father, the kids. But for Poilievre, the Conservative, and Trudeau, the family is a large family. The mother, the father, the kids, grandmom, granddad, brothers, sisters. And so when you have one skilled immigrant, that person can bring his whole family. And so you have a lot of people that are coming and don't have a job. And actually, it's a cost for us. So, and add to that the refugees. As you know, we had a lot of people that crossed illegally our border in Quebec, in my own province in Quebec. So the big majority is refugees and reunification of family. So we need to change that and to have people that will come here because we need their skill. And that's not the case right now. So more and more people understand. And I believe at the next general election, that will be an important subject. And the Conservative and the Liberals are the same about that, because the Conservative Party of Canada with Pierre Poilievre, they are focusing on the big cities. Like I said, there's a lot of seats. And these big cities like Montreal, Toronto, and Vancouver are usually liberal and leftist. So Poilievre won't speak about immigration, and he said that he's okay with the new numbers and he's okay with mass immigration. So I believe that will be an opportunity for us at the next general election.
Would it be fair to say that because you mentioned the Quebec border, from your perspective, would you compare it to the situation on the American-Mexican border, as in it's open and they're just crossing, or are they just being let in via administrative process? How does it look down there? I mean, the so-called refugees, obviously.
Yeah, actually, they were crossing a road called the Roxham Road in Quebec, and last year. And now the good news is, we spoke against that, and the Trudeau government decided to close that road where they were crossing illegally. So we, I believe, as a country, solved the problem. But for the last 5 years, they were crossing, and that was not real refugees, because they were crossing the border with their Gucci and coming from the US, or taking a flight from Africa to the United States, and after that a cab at the border of Quebec and the state of New York. And just to say that we are asking to be refugees, and we were in a position to accept all these people, and that has a huge impact. And now the Trudeau government, after the pressure coming from us, and also some other looking at the polls and knowing that Canadians were fed up with that, he decided to close that road. And every refugee now will have to cross the border. And if they're coming from the US, their life is not in danger in US, so they will have to go back to the US. That was not the case when they were crossing illegally that road, because it was not an official port of entry, and we let them enter the country, and we had to keep them. But now the federal government decided to close that road. We have a lot of refugees that are coming, but if they're coming from the US, they will have to go back to the US. So what happened with that bad policy? We didn't help the real refugees where their life was in danger in a camp somewhere around the globe. And that's not Canadians. We used to open our doors, our arms to real refugees, who are persecuted. And that was not the case the last 5 years. So at least the federal government, with the pressure coming from the Quebec government and the Ontario government, because Rob Ford said a couple of months ago that there's too many refugees in the street on the street in Toronto. So, and we have a lot of them that are in hotels paying by taxpayers. So that pressure coming from the Quebec and the Ontario government helped us, and the federal government decided a couple of months ago to close that road.
Well, I can imagine how serious the situation is if not only the PPC is putting pressure, but even the federal government, the provincial governments in Quebec and Ontario, which are not populist to say the least, but they're even feeling the heat, so to say. Because I find it interesting that sometimes, I'm listening in the background to one of my favorite classical stations from Toronto, Classical 96. And they do a news segment there, and I'm hearing all the time that there are refugees on the streets in Toronto. They're looking for housing to them. And I'm thinking, okay, you take in the refugees, but you're not providing the housing. How does that work? It reeks sort of desperation that we're only taking them, but not for the official reasons that are given, but some for nefarious reasons. For example, as you mentioned, cultural change. Max, I just want to ask you, because I know one of the points that your enemies make and they throw at you is the fact that you are against the Multiculturalism Act in Canada. And one of the things that I found fascinating during my time in Canada was there was always this prevailing spirit that, as in opposition to the United States, where we have the melting pot, Canada, in essence, doesn't have an identity. We are constantly creating this Canadian identity, and therefore every immigrant that comes to Canada contributes to the identity. And at the end of the day, when you think about it, the real Canadian identity, which I believe exists, and I know you believe exists, basically becomes hollowed out, and it comes down to, Timbits at Tim Hortons and maybe watching the NHL from time to time. And that's about it. Language, culture, history, God forbid religion. Those are things we don't talk about because we're Canadian. But I think there is becoming an awareness. And I think thanks to people such as yourself on the social front, Canadians are starting to ask themselves, maybe there is a Canadian identity that is older than Justin Trudeau or, 10 minutes ago. If you could speak to the fact of maintaining, or what is the substance of a classical Canadian identity? What does it incorporate, in your opinion? Because we both know it's there.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for asking. As you know, I'm a French Canadian, and I can tell you that the culture in Quebec, the Francophone part of the country, is very different than the culture in Calgary or the culture downtown Toronto. But that's our country. That has been always the case. And so that's why we need to have a smaller government in Ottawa that will give more autonomy to provincial government and not try to have one policy that fits for all. We have different culture in our country, but and we must promote what unites us, not the diversity. Like I said in my tweet, more and more diverse, and that's why we are against the Multiculturalist Act. There's if you're a Canadian from a Chinese descent, you have the right to celebrate the Chinese New Year, but the federal government must not promote that by giving you subsidies and money for that. So everybody must be free to do what they want to do. And so right now the federal government is giving a lot of money to different ethnic groups and promoting their culture. When you decided to come to Canada, it's a very difficult decision for a person. You are going to a new country, and you are looking behind you, and not everybody can come with you, and you are looking at your culture and your old country, and you're ready to be part of a new country. So that's why we must stop to promote multiculturalism and promoting what unite us. What unite us? It's our love for the Charter of Rights. Every Canadian is equal before the law. Every man and woman are equal before the law. The rule of law, and the fact that we have different culture in the same country. So we are a different country, and we have a national identity, but we are not promoting that. For example, the Canada Day is the 1st of July for one day, but the Trudeau government decided to give a month to the alphabet soup and to celebrate them. So, why not celebrating our country for a month instead of doing that for the trans activists? That's what the Trudeau government, the month of June was the month of the trans activists and all that alphabetic soup that I don't remember and I don't want to remember. But, that's why we said go back to our roots and just promote our history, our culture. And the federal government is not doing that. So what is happening is we have a lot of immigrants, and they're going to Toronto and Vancouver and Montreal, and they're living in a ghetto. I don't want that. That's why we decided to have a strong position on immigration in 2019, because we love this country and we want this country to be like that in 25 years. I'm looking at what is happening in Europe, in France, in UK. We don't want that in our country. So let's welcome people. Let's taking care of them, but fewer people, and people who will come here to be part of our society.
Yeah, well, Max, as I said before we started the interview, in my time back in the day in Canada, which I think was much of a more merrier country than it is now, but even saying what you said right now would be like anathema. So I'm happy that the scene, the social scene, the political scene in Canada is open to this message, and I think people are waking up as they are all over Western Europe. If you were
but also, I just want to add, Mike,
yep, go ahead.
that when I delivered that speech and that position in 2019 during our first electoral campaign on our position on immigration, fewer immigrants, a maximum of 150,000 a year, not 500,000. The big majority of them must be skilled immigrants. And if we have refugees, they must be sponsored by the private sector, because when the government is in charge, nobody is in charge. And actually right now, the refugees are under the federal government, and the federal government is supposed to be in charge of them. But like you said, they cannot find any hotel or roof for them. So it must come from the private sector. But when I delivered that speech in 2019, the crowd in front of me was, a diverse crowd, people from Jewish faith, from Muslim faith, black, white, people from China, because they were in agreement with my position, because when they came here, it was difficult for them. They came here on the rules, and it took time to be accepted in Canada. And now they know that our doors are open for everybody, and they don't have to speak English or French. And it's not the same thing. When they decided to come to Canada long time ago, that was difficult for them, and they're looking at the situation right now, and they didn't like it. So our policy is very popular also with the immigrants, the old immigrants that came in our country the last 5-10 years. So that's why I believe it's a way to unite everybody if we stop mass immigration.
Well, that must be a shock to a lot of the people at the CBC, saying that a more restrictionist immigration policy can actually unite people. Max, that's heresy. I don't know if Peter Mansbridge is still at the National. I always remember Peter Mansbridge, and this is the National. But I think what you said right now would make them go crazy. Max,
you have a point there, Mike. I just want to add, yes.
Go ahead.
In English Canada, but I must say, in French Canada, in Quebec, the discussion about immigration, at the last general election in Quebec at the provincial level, you have different political parties, and each one of them have a new goal for immigration. The government in power said 50,000 a year. The opposition said 20,000 a year. Another one said 30,000 a year. And nobody in Quebec, the legacy media in Quebec, the francophone one, didn't say that you're racist to have that discussion, because Quebec and Quebecers want to preserve their identity. And, that's the only francophone state in North America. And so a discussion about immigration and immigration level, it's not something special. It's normal. And we have that. We had that discussion long time ago in Quebec. But when I started that discussion at the national level, I can tell you that the legacy English media, that was the first time for them that we had a party that said, fewer immigrants, sustainable immigration. And yes, they were very surprised about that position. But I believe right now, if they look at the polls in Canada, all across the country, they can see that, that's not a marginal proposal, because about between 45 and 55% of the population agree with our proposal to say no to mass immigration.
In the upcoming elections, just sticking with the theme of of immigration, if you could outline, because I noticed you did mention the numbers that you want to cut them down. What other aspects of or the refugee or the immigration program do you want to put front and center for the PPC in the upcoming election season within the 2 years that I think are relevant for Canada today?
Yeah, actually, more than ever, we need to have that discussion at the federal level, and we are bringing that discussion at the federal level. And I believe that's in all these establishment political parties, the Liberals, the Conservative, the NDP, the Bloc Québécois, the Green, won't speak about that. But we are bringing that discussion, and the opposition is the same one that we had in 2019. A maximum of 150,000 immigrants a year. 75% of them must be skilled immigrants. And yes, to reunification of family, but the family must be the immediate family, not the large family. And for refugees, all our refugees must be sponsored by the private sector, churches and the private sector, not the government. So, and at the same time, we must abolish the Multiculturalism Act and not promote anything, but promoting our history and our culture as a country.
In terms of switching subjects a bit right now, because you were front and center in the fight against the COVID totalitarianism, which your prime minister became world famous, unfortunately. In Poland, for example, we have our populists are speaking of when they come to power, they want to do a sort of Nuremberg for all those people who locked down Poland and brought in all those absurd machinations, which were basically spread all over the Western world, just in terms of, I guess, degree. You could say there were differences, but it was pretty much the same thing, you know, with the mask, with the vaccinations and so on, with the mandates. Do you think that chapter in Canada is over, or do you believe that there are things that still need to be cleared up and people that need to be, I don't know, judged by public opinion for what they did during those 2 years of, locking down the country, basically? Because to a lot of people, especially the ones who, had relatives die and businesses shut down and so on, everything that initiated that great movement of the truckers in Canada, the Freedom Convoy, there's a lot of people that think that justice still has to be done. What do you have to say to those Canadians that feel that we still have to go back to this history because it was something tragic, it's something that should never be repeated?
Yeah, you have a point there. For the legacy media, the establishment political parties, Liberals, Conservative, NDP, Bloc Québécois, and Green, for them, they're saying, that's it, that's past, turn the page. We don't want to have any discussion about what happened during COVID-19. We are the only party who is saying, no, we don't want to turn the page. We need to have a parliamentary committee that will look at it, bring expert, yes, the government expert, but also private sector expert, and looking at everything that they did, lockdowns and why. And I want the government to show Canadians that studies or experts that are saying, yeah, we did that. And after 2 years now, we have more data, we have more studies. So we must be able to have that discussion, because these people must be responsible of their actions. And we are the only party that is asking for that. And I said in the beginning of that pandemic in Canada, I was the only one and the only leader, national leader, who said, enough is enough. We must reopen the economy. We must, we had a lot of Canadians who lost their jobs. And we said everybody must be able to go back to their job with full compensation. It was not popular at that time because the population was manipulated at that time by the legacy media, by the leftists, by the government, and they use fear and propaganda. And the majority of the population at that time were in favor of more lockdowns and stay-at-home orders and curfew and things like that. But today, I believe that it would be very difficult to do the same thing maybe next winter, or if you have another pandemic, because I believe that we were able to convince more people, and I must thank also the truckers. The truckers, after the Freedom Convoy, I can tell you that we had more and more Canadians on our side saying enough is enough and we must go back to our day-to-day life. But I want to be sure that these politicians will be responsible of their action. And yes, the first thing that we can do as the population is not to vote for them. So that, but also I want to know more, and I want also to have more details about what happened. A little bit like DeSantis did in Florida during COVID-19. He had, experts from different point of view, and he was able to have the right policies to fight COVID-19, and he did very well. So we must have that after the fact in Canada.
Well, I couldn't agree more, and we're hoping for the same also in Poland. Switching gears now to a more global topic, Max, is it in the interests of Canada and Canadians for the Ottawa government to be supporting the government of Volodymyr Zelensky in the war with Russia? Why or why not?
Yeah. First, we must say that it is a corrupt government, and that's not what the legacy media is telling us here in Canada. And we must say that it's very dangerous. It's a proxy war between the US and Russia using Ukraine. And Canada is part of that, and also NATO. That must end. And, I'm not an expert, but I look at what Colonel McGregor said, Judge Napolitano in the US, and us in Canada. Our country, it's, we're not warriors. If you look at our history, we did not participate in the Vietnam War. We did not participate in the Iraq War. We were the one who bring the peacekeeping and for the UN. So we are a country that is fighting for peace and peacekeeping, and not a warrior country. But right now, what Trudeau is doing, it's at the opposite of our history. But also, it's very dangerous because we, the West, we did not listen to Putin. And Putin said that he doesn't want any NATO base at his doors, like Kennedy said in 1962. Kennedy said to Khrushchev, to the Soviet Union, I don't want any of your base in Cuba. That was the Cuban crisis. And we had an agreement for that, and that did not happen. And so now we want Ukraine. That's not the must be a neutral country to have a ceasefire and having a negotiation, and that must be the role of our country. But actually, it is not. And the official opposition, the Conservatives, are in line with the government on that. We are sending money and equipment to Ukraine. And as you know, we are broken as a country. We have a huge deficit, and we need to help Canadian first. And that's why the war in Ukraine, we are the only national political party against that. And it's sad what is happening. And actually, I'm looking at what the US are doing. They want to continue that war, and that war by giving more equipment. But Ukraine won't be able to win that war. And so they must understand that, and they must come at the table, and we must end that conflict. And I was a little bit surprised that the Chinese Communist Party is promoting peace. And that was supposed the role of the US. But the US is not a superpower anymore, and you can see that. So it's a little bit sad, and it can be dangerous for our country. Russia is our neighbor, and Russia must not be our enemy. But for the legacy media and the government and the conservative, we must fight Russia. And no, that's not. I believe that I hope it will end well, but it's very dangerous. And we'll see what will happen. But we have a strong position to promote our history as a country, and our history as a country is not to be part of these wars.
Yeah, I think it was towards the end of the 80s, and I'm not sure if it was the then Soviet foreign minister, Mr. Shevardnadze, who said, I think, to James Baker after the collapse of the USSR, that James, the USSR collapsed. We did the worst thing to you that we could have. We have taken away an enemy. You don't have us to beat around anymore. So I guess I have to ask because, as you said, the legacy media, it's the same thing in Poland. I guarantee you. Unfortunately, this is I think Hungary might be the, the exception here, unfortunately. But what they're trying to tell us is that your main enemy, from school children up to adults, is Vladimir Putin. Vladimir Putin is the man you should be worried about. But as Donald Trump said, I think it was 3 months ago, pardon me, in a very excellent statement, which I believe he made in Mar-a-Lago, he said, and I think he was referring to the broader Western context, that our enemies are not in China, are not in Russia, they're in our own countries. It's the Trudeaus, it's the Bidens. In Poland, it's the Dudas, the Morawieckis. And I think it's just a brilliant way to turn the public opinion around, because we've been so imbued with the Cold War for 50 years, your generation, that you can only expect the worst from Russia. But as I said, Russia's not perfect. We can say many bad things about Russia, but man, Russia is not the Soviet Union. Those times are gone. Putin is not a communist. But I think it's easy to imbue people with this thinking that, it's still somehow the Soviet Empire. And then you get ridiculous statements like, oh, he just wants to rebuild the Soviet Empire. He's going all in. And I think another aspect of this in Canada is, sadly, because it's obviously a pricky topic, but I mean, the fact, how many Canadians, for example, know who Mrs. Newland's grandfather was, right? That he was editor-in-chief of a neo-Nazi newspaper in Krakow, right here in my own home country in Poland. And I think that plays to a lot of what she's doing right now. If you can speak to maybe Mrs. Newland's very aggressive activism on this front in terms of promoting Canada's active role in supporting the proxy war with Russia, and where do you think that stems from, Mrs. Newland specifically?
I believe that she has a lot of influence in the government, and I believe that she was very influential in the decision to be part of that war with the U.S. and sending equipments and money there. As you know, she's the finance minister right now, and for her, this country, Canada, up to now, we sent about $8 billion where we are broken. But also, I just want to add that these two territories, Donbass and Crimea, were under Soviet jurisdictions a couple of years ago, decades ago. So, and we must understand that. And the people who are living there are speaking Russian. So let's be honest and have a discussion about that around a table where you're going to try to have a peace agreement. But for the Trudeau government and for his finance minister, they don't want that. They don't want that because also politically, I believe that they try to pander to the Ukraine community, Canadians from distant Ukraine. And there's a lot in Canada, about 1 million people. So at the same time, they use foreign politics to do inside Canadian politics and try to have support from Canadians from Ukraine descent.
Right. Yeah, it's the lobbies. Indeed, he was always wondering that we have so many lobbies pushing politics in Washington, and it came time when you finally have a strong, very organized lobby, because the Ukrainian lobby is very well organized in Poland. In Canada. For those of you who are watching, by the way, I highly encourage you to follow the Twitter account of one Ivan Kachanovsky. He's a Ukrainian professor at the University of Ottawa. He's actually promoting a different narrative, which I think needs a hearing, and it's very important in terms of what we're seeing right now. Moving towards the end, Mr. Max, you've been very gracious with your time, but I wanted to ask you a final question pertaining to the role of federalism in Canada, because you hail from Quebec. Now, obviously, I even remember 1996, the referendum in Canada, watching CBC till like 3 a.m, whether they were going to separate, they're going to stay. And I know there's a lot of poo-pooing going around. I have family out in Alberta. They always look on Quebec as, oh, they always want to sucker money out of us. And by the way, we don't like the Habs because we're for the Oilers and so on, or the Maple Leafs. But federalism as it is in Canada today, is it more conducive to a unity of Canadianism in terms of a nation state, or do you think it has become a system whereby making unhealthy separatism more probable in the future? Would the PPC, for example, change anything in the way Canada is constituted on the level of relations between the province and Ottawa?
Well, we don't have federalism anymore in this country. The federal government is not following the Constitution. The federal government is not respecting our Constitution, because if you respect our Constitution, provinces have a lot of authority and jurisdictions. Now the federal government, for winning votes, and they interfere in provincial jurisdictions. And I understand people in Alberta, they're not happy with that. And same thing also with people in Quebec. So if you want to keep that country united, you need to respect our Constitution. You need to have a radical decentralization that will be in line with our Constitution. The federal government must be not a big fat government that is doing everything, but a smaller government that will respect provincial autonomy and also personal liberty. But that's not the case right now, and that's why I'm scared. You have, if you look at the poll in Alberta, there's about, around 25 to 30% of people that are looking for the separation because they're not happy. Ottawa is always telling Alberta what to do or what not to do. So all that must stop. But the Conservative and the Liberals, they like the way that they're managing the country, and they try to solve every problems by interfering in provincial jurisdictions. So we are the only party. And you spoke about the referendum in 1995. I must say that I voted for the yes in Quebec at that time. Why? Because I wanted the federal government to go away. I said, I don't want the federal government to interfere in our provincial jurisdictions. You must respect the Constitution. And that's why we have that position. And that's why I understand people in Alberta, in Western Canada, we have Western alienation. They're not happy, but these mainstream political parties won't speak about that Western alienation and won't come with the only solution is to have a smaller government and respecting provincial autonomy. Like I said, we have different culture in this country. So in Alberta, if they want to do something different than Quebec, they must have the right to do that. And Ottawa must not interfere. The only way to keep that country united is to have a radical decentralization in Ottawa. And that's part of our platform as a populist party.
Well, now, ladies and gentlemen, you know why they call him the Albertan from Quebec. There you go, firing on all cylinders against the corruption in Ottawa. Max, it was an honor. Thank you for your time. You were very gracious. Audience, give Max a like on his Twitter. Give him a follow. We have all the links in our description box. Give the PPC a follow. If you're in Canada, obviously, I encourage you from far off, and I think Max would support this. Get involved locally, get involved nationally. I think you're going to need a lot of good candidates out there in the near future. And we hope to have you back on the show soon to do, as I mentioned, we do a MAGA update with Paul Ingrassia every month. We hope to do a MACA update with Max for our show. Make Canada great again, obviously. I think we still have a lot to do in that regard. And once again, thank you guys. Support our work via Revolut. It helps to expand the channel, and we are planning some changes in the near future, so help us out with that via Revolut. And stick around. We have an interview scheduled next week with the great Judge Napolitano on Tuesday. Keep up the notifications. And Max, once again, merci beaucoup for your time, and hope to see you on Votum TV soon.
Thank you very much, Mike. I appreciate that opportunity, and have a nice day or a nice evening. So see you soon.
Thank you. See you soon. Have a good one. Take care.